What's going on, everybody, and welcome back into the Brenden Schaeffer Fantasy Football channel. Today, we're taking a look at Week 7 trade opportunities at the running back position by diving back into the performances from Week 6 to determine who should we be selling high on, who should we maybe buy low on at the running back position after the week that was. Appreciate you guys for joining me. Make sure to hit subscribe on this channel, Brenden Schaeffer Fantasy Football, for fantasy football content all season long, especially as it pertains to trades. That is the main focus of the channel during the season, is identifying who should you be trading for before it's maybe too late to acquire that player. We're always looking to trade into better situations for our fantasy teams. So let's go ahead and get started by looking at the Week 6 performances. We're here on Yahoo. You can see on the screen, here's how I've got it sorted. If you would like to follow along, you can pull up a screen on Yahoo, and you can see all players, running back position, Week 6 stats is what we're looking at. So let's go ahead and dive in here by looking at the very top of the board and then working our way down. Raheem Mostert led the way at the running back position this week with 34 fantasy points. The scoring setting, by the way, that I look at for these videos is PPR. Raheem Mostert and really whoever the lead running back in Miami is going to continue to be fantastic. We would have to think for fantasy. Mostert was looking a little bit like a second fiddle when Devon Achane was playing and healthy, but right now Achane is on IR. So for Mostert, I think the wheels are up. The arrow is pointing up for the foreseeable future with Achane out. There will be some others that mix in. I think when Jeff Wilson comes off of IR, he'll be interesting, but Mostert is still showing that he has juice even at his age. He's over 30 years old, but he's playing really, really well. I think if you have Raheem Mostert, you could decide to trade high if you wanted, but I think he's also a very good bet in one of the league's most explosive offenses to continue just being as good as he's been, especially until Devon Achane comes back. Travis Etienne continuing to be fantastic for fantasy with 23 points. Kyren Williams, man, disappointing injury. He's going to be out for a number of weeks. Not 100% sure whether the Rams will put him on IR yet, but I think at least 2 to 3 weeks, if not more, that it sounds like Kyren Williams is going to miss. So if you have him on your team, you could maybe try to trade him away if you're desperate. Otherwise, I think the role is safe for him when he comes back. When you look at the Rams right now and the folks that are going to be staffing that running back room with Kyren Williams and Ronnie Rivers, the backup, out, Zach Evans, I think, is going to take the lead there. He was probably popular on your waiver claims this morning. And Royce Freeman has actually been activated too. So it's kind of bleak. I feel like when Kyren Williams returns, his role is going to be safe there for him. It's just a question of when that's going to be. So if you're a team that is struggling right now and you don't think you can afford to wait on Kyren Williams, you might be able to trade him for a more stable option, because the folks that are seeing his weekly performances might be willing to, if they're 5-1 or 4-2 maybe even, trade away a mid running back to just stash away Kyren Williams. But if you're in need of a mid running back because you don't have anybody to start this week, I could see you wanting to trade Kyren Williams, but try to avoid it, because I think even if it's 4 to 6 weeks that he's out, when he comes back, it should be by the fantasy playoffs before then, and he's going to be back into a very good, robust role at the running back position. Breece Hall is continuing to look really good for the Jets. They're finally unleashing him, and I think you can just expect him to be a top 10 running back moving forward. There were times to trade for Breece Hall earlier in the year, but those times have passed, with the exception being he is on bye this week. So if there's anybody out there that's looking at it and saying, Breece Hall, only 39 yards last week, he's, not going to continue to be great necessarily because the Jets have a bad offense, maybe they'll be desperate enough to trade him away. Like, the teams with Breece Hall might be 1-5 or 2-4 right now, and maybe looking at his bye week and saying, yeah, we can't really afford to wait. We got to get somebody that can play this week so we can bag a victory. That would be a chance to trade for Breece Hall if you're looking for that. And I would say this, the PPR involvement, 5 for 54 is what makes it. He may not always run for 177 yards like he did against Denver, but the PPR opportunities are good. He did happen to find the end zone in both of the last 2 games. In the upcoming schedule after the bye with the Giants, Chargers, Raiders, some exploitable matchups for sure as you go down the line for Breece Hall. And the Jets kind of need to rely upon him for as long as Zach Wilson is the quarterback. So I would be looking to maybe try to trade for Breece Hall, but understanding that it might not be possible. And there are going to be weeks where he doesn't perform, and so you might just want to wait for one of those weeks to happen if you really want to try and get him on the cheap. Derrick Henry continuing to kind of bounce back for his season. We look at that Week 3 performance against Cleveland when we did the episode saying you might want to trade for him now. Since then, he's gone 26, 9, and 19 in PPR settings. So definitely somebody who you could try to stack up for the late season push. He's going to have a nice playoff schedule, as we talked about, and he is on bye this week as well. So when we get into these bye weeks, and week 7 is a big one for buys, we are going to talk a lot about this being the time to trade for somebody, because when there are teams who don't feel they can afford to have their best player on bye, they might trade for a comparable running back who's maybe a little less effective, but somebody that they can actually play right now. And as the person acquiring the player on bye, that's always a move that we want to make, because if you think about it, the player you're trading away might have a week 13 bye. So eventually that debt is going to have to be paid on the bye weeks. If you can maybe trade a player who's already had their bye, and you're the person receiving that player, you're thinking, okay, I never have to deal the bye. But otherwise, you're going to probably eventually have to have the bye. So why not trade for the player now when he's on bye, get it out of the way, and then you have Derrick Henry the rest of the season. I'm always looking to make those types of one-for-one trades. Find some players that you think aren't quite as good as Derrick Henry, and if that's the player that you have, go offer that player for Derrick Henry, and then just try to pick up somebody off waivers to fill your running back spot. It's just for 1 week, and eventually you're going to have to do it anyway. So that's kind of my thought process as it pertains to buys. Use the buys to your advantage. A lot of people probably don't think that way, but I think it's a sensible way to approach it. Ramondre Stevenson bouncing back. The buy low window on him is probably past, but he was a name that we talked about last week. When you had 3 bad games in a row, it tends to even out for guys who are talented in workhorse roles, and that's the case for Ramondre. It's not a great offense, so there is a little trepidation around that whole situation, but if you happen to buy him low, I think you were pretty happy with the performance in week 6. Zach Moss, man, is interesting because he is continuing to produce for fantasy football. He's doing it with PPR. So, like, that was the possibility that if he remains like a third down back and catches passes with Gardner Minshew, I would say that this performance from Zach Moss is the one that lets me know, like, hey, don't completely dismiss this guy. And maybe he'll have a bad game at some point, but you can still probably go ahead and consider him a factor unless they're just really slowly bringing Jonathan Taylor along. I mean, Zach Moss outscored Taylor again this week, and I don't think that's going to continue forever. But if this role remains where he's catching 6 for 38 every week, that's 10 fantasy points right there if you play PPR. The fact that Zach Moss also scored makes his performance look better, but you would take 10 points a week from Zach Moss and then having a little bit of touchdown upside as well in a flex spot or in an RB2 spot if you're a team that built around wide receivers. So something to keep in mind there. If you're desperate, you might be able to get him. My take, though, is I'm still selling Zach Moss off of this game. If you've held on to this point, you might be able to convince somebody that, hey, he's just as good as one of these main running backs with the 50 points that he scored in the last 2 weeks. Zach Moss would be a sell high for me just because I'm going to continue to bet in the long run more on Jonathan Taylor being able to take over more of that backfield workload than he has to this point, because he's just kind of coming off of that injury, coming off of the holdout, whatever you want to call it. I still think at the end of the day, at the end of the season, you see Jonathan Taylor more involved. Kenneth Walker continues to be great. He's a guy that we buy high. He's going to be great all year as long as he's healthy. Seattle wants to run the ball, and he is very good at running the football. And so last week we talked about maybe being a chance to buy him in week 5 because he was on the bye. And if you did, you continued to see great performances from him in week 6. And he's through the bye now. So if you're a team that is trying to trade away a Derrick Henry because you go, I can't afford to miss anybody for bye weeks, I'll trade Henry for Walker all day long, and maybe would add a little bit to that to get that trade across the finish line. Let's see here. DeAndre Swift continuing to be very good. Alvin Kamara, I view those guys very similarly. I think they're both having workhorse roles, and Swift is even in a better offense. But it was kind of weird the way that the Swift narratives formed early in draft season, and then week 1 when he wasn't involved, it was like, oh my gosh, is this why are the Eagles just basically trading for this guy and not using him? No, he's been the main guy, and the PPR value is just out of this world. 8 catches for 40 and a touchdown this week was great for DeAndre Swift people. Again, none of these guys we're talking about now are going to be buy lows by any means. But let's try to get closer to the end of this list so that we can see some of the players that underperformed this week. Pollard was great. He's going to continue to be great. So when he has a bad week, you trade for him. That's the way it works. Kareem Hunt was on the board. Chuba Hubbard. As long as Miles Sanders is out, Hubbard's going to be good. But like the Hunts and the Hubbards and the Pachecos, with the weeks that they had, are probably guys that I'm looking to package away to acquire more consistent superstars at the position. I will say this, though, for Pacheco. You look at his numbers, man. He's been great for fantasy. 13 or more points in each of the last 4 weeks. If I'm trading him away, I'm aiming high for a guy like Bijan Robinson and saying, hey, Pacheco's outscored Bijan Robinson for the most part for the last 4 weeks. I'll give you the guy that's been better for the last month, and I'll add a wide receiver, a wide receiver 2 or something to get Bijan Robinson. I'd still rather have Bijan in the long run, but that may not end up being correct. Like, the other side of that is, if you have the RB1 for the Kansas City Chiefs, what does that mean to you in a year where the wide receivers haven't been reliable? Because Pacheco has been getting more and more opportunities, and this week you saw the PPR value as well with 6 catches and 36 yards. So, again, that's 10 fantasy points. Don't discount these backs that aren't viewed as workhorses, but they get a lot of work in the passing game. And Pacheco has been seeing the field more than in past years, I guess I should say, than last year when he was a rookie and kind of working his way in. Let's talk McCaffrey, because I think, again, this is probably today maybe, like Wednesday, Thursday might be the best chance all year that you have to buy McCaffrey, because if we get news that he's going to actually play on Monday night, then that's going to take away that buy low window. The Yahoo blurb here saying that he avoided a long-term injury, but he's dealing with an oblique/rib issue for the 49ers. Again, not long-term, could be available for Monday's game against the Vikings. That's the report from Adam Schefter. And obviously, Christian McCaffrey is the number 1 player at the running back position. But if you have somebody that for whatever reason isn't like 5-1 or 4-2 with McCaffrey, and they're like, I don't know, man, I love him, but if I can get Bijan Robinson for him, if I can get Tony Pollard plus a good wide receiver for him, maybe I have to do that. I'm not saying it's going to work. I actually tried that exact thing in this league. I offered Bijan Robinson with, I forget the wide receiver. I think it was Smith and Jigba, which normally you're going to, like, it got declined, and rightfully so. I think you'd have to offer a better, more stable wide receiver 2 than Jackson Smith and Jigba. But my case is I have all superstar wide receivers, so I don't have a wide receiver 2 on the team except maybe Tank Dell, and he's injured and on bye week this week, so it didn't make sense to offer him. So I sent it out with Bijan Robinson and JSN. Got declined. Not a surprise. But like, if you had trying to think of who a good example at wide receiver would be, like Nico Collins maybe, guys in that tier, like Deontay Johnson caliber players, but if he were healthy, like Tyler Lockett. If you had Tyler Lockett and Bijan and offered for McCaffrey, I'm not saying that gets accepted either, but you could see a world in which somebody who might be starting crud at their flex or their wide receiver 2 spot might say, you know what, I love McCaffrey, but I'm 3-3 and Bijan Robinson is basically as good. And so like, those are deals that maybe get done this week, whereas they probably don't even get done by Saturday, because I bet McCaffrey plays this week. He's just a freak. He's tough. He's just going to, if it's a pain tolerance thing, he'll be in there. That's kind of my opinion. So McCaffrey will probably make him the headline of the video just because he's a superstar player, and I would like people to click and subscribe to my channel so I can eventually make a little money off this. By the way, subscribe if you enjoy the content. It's free to subscribe, and we'll be doing fantasy content all season long. And we do a ton of draft content. That's really when I started the channel in August. I did, a bunch of mock drafts on Sleeper that just kind of get you into the right mindset of what we were looking for. And, if you enjoy that kind of content, this is going to be the channel for you. But McCaffrey is going to be a big name this week. I don't know that he's going to be traded that often. End of the video, we'll go and look and see how often he's been traded. And if we see any examples of that on Yahoo, we'll go ahead and take a look at that. Saquon Barkley returned to action finally. Didn't have a great game, but, he's going to continue to be just a volume workhorse. That 24 carries for 93 yards with 4 catches, man. Tyrod Taylor was their quarterback, so not efficient as an offense, but that is great. I think Barkley is a buy low off of just the workload. He could always get hurt again, but this guy's probably angling to be top 5 RB the rest of the year. Like McCaffrey, Bijan Robinson, I'm very high on Tony Pollard. Barkley is in that same conversation, and I'm not sure how many other guys are. Like, just he's going to be bust proof on a weekly basis just based on the volume. And he's the best player the Giants have, so they have to use him. Mostert is up there as well. ETN is, but man, Barkley might be, like, right now I have Bijan and Pollard on the same team. I would wonder if I would even have the guts to offer one of those guys for Barkley straight up, but it's all the same tier to me. They're all like top 4 is the way I would look at that. And Eckler is he's in that for sure as well. But we haven't seen his name yet. He's down here at the bottom of the list, so maybe he's a buy low. But let's continue on. Brian Robinson, that's kind of what you get for him. Bijan Robinson could be a buy low, honestly. There's a world in which the Falcons are just never great, and Bijan Robinson is never great as a result. But if you can tell me I'm getting 8 targets for my running back whose talent is at the top of the NFL chart at the running back position, I'm going to take that. And I know I'm going to get double-digit carries every game. Like, it's just a volume thing where when he finds touchdowns, it's going to be better. He may not find touchdowns that often this year, but yet he's never busted. His high-end upside hasn't really shown, but there's going to be a game where he breaks an 80-yard run and he goes bananas. We just haven't seen it yet, but his situation is so good that when healthy, he's top 5 for me for the rest of the season. So if some people have him and are looking at him and going, I'm being outscored by Pacheco every damn week, what's going on? Okay, that's why we do these videos, because you might have a chance to do it. Like, would I trade DeAndre Swift for Bijan Robinson or Alvin Kamara for Bijan Robinson? I would, and Swift has been better pretty much every week, but I would still make that move, and most fantasy players would too. But there are going to be some who go, Bijan Robinson, he was overhyped, and I'm getting tired of just having mid 13-point efforts, and especially if it's half PPR, he's been performing even lower. So you might catch somebody napping. I would still be buying on Bijan based on just the volume and the workload that he's gotten. Savon Ahmed, filling in there in Miami. He won't be relevant for long when Jeff Wilson comes back. Zeke Elliott is going to continue to get volume there for New England. 7 carries. He scored a touchdown this week. That's what it was. So, yeah, you're not really hoping to have to start him. Let's talk Jonathan Taylor. He was the big name last week, and kind of weird, right? We're still seeing him used in the PPR game, but not a lot of running going on. But the Colts were down big to Jacksonville in this game, so both Moss and Taylor were more used as receivers out of the backfield because they were trailing. Taylor's still a big-time buy for me. I know that the offense is not going to be as robust with Anthony Richardson out for the year, but Gardner Minshew will dump it off to these players. So in PPR, I think Moss and Taylor are great options. Moss, if you have him, I'm trying to trade him up for a package to get Bijan Robinson or a package to get Barkley. Like, I'm trying to swing big and trade my Zach Moss with maybe a wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 1 to try and find one of these running backs. It's not going to work every time, but there are going to be teams that are desperate and go, I just need the depth, so I'll do it. Whereas I would also trade for Zach Moss if I had somebody in a lower tier. Like if I could pair Ezekiel Elliott with a wide receiver or a second, mid-level running back. Elliott's not a safe weekly play, but he scores 11 points, and so you might be able to say, hey, this guy really needs a wide receiver. He might think that Zach Moss is on the way down, in that Zeke, maybe big name cachet. I can trade Zeke and a wide receiver for Moss. Like it's always 2 for 1 that we're looking to do. But sometimes a guy could be a buy and a sell basically at the same time in the same week if you just contextualize what you're talking about with him. But Taylor's a buy for me. Jacobs, man, is I guess he's probably a buy off of this week because he's been over 11 for 4 weeks in a row, never lower than 9. Volume is king. He's going to continue to get it, but he just hasn't been super efficient. So like Jacobs is in that probably back end RB1 tier for me. Would I trade Jacobs to get Bijan? I think I would. But it's just going to depend on how everybody individually thinks about these players. Off of a 27-point game for Jacobs, you might be thinking, oh, he's back. Like he's going to be the star that he was last year. Off of an 11-point game, are you thinking that still? Are you recognizing that he's still got 25 carries and 5 targets? Or are you saying, oh my gosh, he only got 11 points. He's just like a back-end RB1 or maybe he's an RB2 this year. Like, you have to kind of gauge your league mate. Ask him, hey, man, where are you on Josh Jacobs? And they'll tell you. And if they won't, then, you probably don't get a trade done with that person because they're trying to be skeevy about it. But I think sometimes asking questions can help you as well. Madison, yeah, I just don't care about him. Jerome Ford, those guys are getting double-digit points, and that's fine. They're both going to get workload. They're kind of very similar in terms of their role in their offenses, but they're not like elite players talent-wise. Eckler, though, is in just a weird game, man. This game looked like between the Chargers and Cowboys, it was going to be a shootout after the first 2 possessions, and then nobody scored the rest of the game. But the opportunity is undeniable, I should say, for Austin Eckler. He's going to continue to get work in the passing game and in the run game, and he's really good. So I would be trading for him because imagine you're the person who had Eckler this entire time, and you're like, man, he was great week 1. I've had to wait a month to get him back, and that's what I get, 10 points. Half of his projection. Screw that guy. Like, again, we're reactionary sometimes as fantasy players. I would trade for Austin Eckler this week. Absolutely. If my roster had depth to be able to pull off that type of offer. All right, scrolling down to the next page, we've got guys who have struggled. Joe Mixon is going to continue to get volume. So if you've got lower caliber guys or guys who have been scoring decently, but we don't expect it to continue, then you could make an offer for Joe Mixon. Jordan Mason, we'll see. It all depends on Christian McCaffrey's injury, but I did pick him up in some leagues off waivers. Tyjae Spears, man, he continues to just kind of mix in with some opportunity, and had a 48-yard reception this week that made him a little more fantasy relevant. I think Tyjae Spears is a potential league-winning guy if something would happen to Derrick Henry. So having him rostered, he should be rostered in every league. That much I do know. Oh, let's take a look. Javonte Williams, probably not a buy low. This is maybe just kind of where he's going to live. 7 to 9 fantasy points a week. Not overly exciting. Definitely disappointing compared to where you were drafting him. James Cook is someone we should talk about, because if you look at the stats, he's had a good fantasy month and then 2 bad games in a row. And 14 for 71 was efficient. They just weren't putting him on the field. Every time I look in that Sunday Night Football game between the Bills and the Giants, you've got freaking Latavius Murray on the field. What's going on? What are you doing, Bills? Made no sense to me. Cook looked good in my eyes, but he just didn't get to play. So I don't know if that was a game plan thing or what was going on, but the Bills' offense sucked. I'm not saying that was the reason, but James Cook, I think that I didn't even target him once in the passing game. I don't understand. Latavius Murray's not a good player. I don't understand what was happening there. But for fantasy, I still think he's kind of a soft buy, because I think he can get back to this point where he was 10, 19, 13, 14 fantasy points instead of 5 and 7 the last 2 weeks. Problem is, we got to trust that coaching staff to use him, and I don't know the reason that he wasn't used as much as he probably should have been in that game. Rashad White stinks, so I'm still not looking to trade for him. Nothing about the Ravens is appealing to me. Craig Reynolds is a good pickup in case David Montgomery is out for a long time. We see Jaleel McLaughlin. He's second fiddle now to Javonte, but they like him. Sean Payton likes Jaleel McLaughlin. He should still be rostered. Looks like he was picked up in this league, actually. I dropped him last week, but I got a deep team, and so I just didn't have room for him with guys coming up on bye. But he should probably be rostered for sure. Taking a look at now we're looking for big names. Montgomery's the big one that we want to talk about here, because he's going to be out. He is expected to miss some time, is the word from Dan Campbell. That could mean 3 or 4 weeks. I'm thinking it's going to be at least 3, because he'll miss this week. He'll miss week 8. He's got to bye week 9. So week 10 is the earliest. If they put him on IR, it wouldn't be until week 12, because he'd have to miss 4 games, which would be 7, 8, 10, 11. So I don't think you'll see him on IR. They're going to try to squeeze through the next 2 weeks, unless they think it's a long-term injury. And if he goes on IR, then it's might be curtains for his for his usefulness until about after Thanksgiving, which would be really tough potentially, because Montgomery's been so good for the Lions. Right now, knowing what we know, which is that we don't know enough, I would trade for him, assuming I'm going to miss him for 3 weeks. It could be less. It could certainly be more. But I think that people were kind of suspect of David Montgomery in draft season, even though the Lions signed him and said he was going to be a big part. And then he has been a massive part, much bigger than Jahmyr Gibbs, of their offense. But now he's injured. And so you might be able to get people to revert back mentally to, Jahmyr Gibbs is going to take over while Montgomery's out. And that's going to be kind of what it is. Montgomery is going to be useful that entire year when he is active and healthy. So he's a soft trade for if you're a 5-1 or a 4-2 or 6-0, whatever. If you're having a great season and you can afford to trade away somebody that's going to trade away the guy that's going to get you 10 or 11 or 12 per game, and hopefully you have a backup running back you can plug in that gets you 8 or 9 per game for the next few weeks. Because if you're a playoff team, you want David Montgomery on your team. So Javonte for Montgomery, I would do that trade right now. I might actually offer that in some places and see what I can get on people. If I've got the depth, for sure, I'm doing that deal. I might even would I trade Mixon for Montgomery? Probably not. But Mixon's on bye this week. I could see them making that trade. Yeah, I would. I actually would. As long as I had an RB2 that could get me through, I think I'd do that. But this week, you're not playing Joe Mixon anyway because he's on bye. So that's kind of interesting. Not saying these trades could get done. And anytime I say I would do a trade, that means I'll also add in my bench wide receiver or my flex wide receiver to get that deal done, depending on who it is. But that's kind of what I'm looking at there. I'm holding out hope for Charbonnet, not because I think he's going to be relevant with Walker, but if Walker ever got hurt, I think Charbonnet is a talented player that would absolutely go bananas. So he's got to be rostered. Do not let Charbonnet hit the waiver wire in your leagues. That's my opinion. If you're looking long-term and you're a playoff team, man, you stash that guy on your bench because injuries that happen in late November decide fantasy seasons. But it's hard right now in mid-October to think in those terms because right now life's good. Your guys aren't hurt. Your guys are playing well. and you don't need to worry about anything. Especially if I'm the Walker owner, you got to get Charbonnet. If you're a 5-1 team that just the only thing that could hurt you and keep you out of a title is injuries. So that's my advice there. Looking down the line, nobody on this page that had really, really bad weeks is necessarily popping off the page as players that you need to target this week. Yeah, none of them are real producers. So it's kind of a lighter week, but let's go ahead and take a look at I think we're looking for the trade market here. Nope, that's not what we want. We want Trade Hub, transaction trends. That's what it is. See who's been traded the most among some of these guys in fantasy at the running back position. Zach Moss has been traded a ton. That's kind of interesting. Derrick Henry being traded. So you see Henry and Mixon at the top of this list, which makes perfect sense. These guys are on bye, and so people are going to be willing to move on from those players right now if they're desperate. So those are the guys that are being traded more often. Let's go ahead and find some of those answers on the trade market. I want to start with McCaffrey because that was somebody that I said I was trying to see if he's being dealt at all. We see a few trades being made involving him. Wow, this is crazy. These two teams literally traded teams. Okay, we're not going to pay attention to that. Diggs and Ridley for McCaffrey. So, Diggs is pretty good. I'm not sure if I would do that deal because in PPR, I think wide receivers are more likely to stay healthy than running backs, but also McCaffrey is the best player in fantasy, and he's, as long as the Diggs-Ridley guy that's given them up ends up with wide receivers that they can still trust, that's probably a deal that you should make. Taylor and Kelsey for McCaffrey. So, these are still big-time names being moved. Eckler and Nakua for McCaffrey and Moss. I like that side for McCaffrey. Big names being moved, but this tells you, it's possible to trade for McCaffrey right now. It's never going to be possible when he's having his 40-point weeks. McCaffrey and Kupp for Eckler and Brian Robinson. So this is somebody panicking on the McCaffrey injury. And so, it's easily the McCaffrey Kupp side by a landslide here, but that it just gives you an example that these things can happen. McCaffrey for Olave and Bijan. That's kind of what I said. I tried to offer Bijan with a wide receiver, and I named Tyler Lockett as a guy that maybe gets that deal done. Olave is a guy that could get that deal done, and I don't hate it for the side getting McCaffrey because, A, they got McCaffrey. B, Olave has not been a guaranteed stud. He's still a wide receiver 1 to me, especially in a deeper league format, but otherwise he is more of a wide receiver 2. And you're getting Christian McCaffrey. So that's exactly the type of trade that I mentioned that you might be able to get done, and it's good to see that there's an example of that. This, I'm going to assume, is a super flex league. Ramondre, Ritter, and a kicker for McCaffrey. If it's not super flex, it's obviously just a completely ridiculous deal. The McCaffrey side wins. Even in super flex, though, a QB2 and Stevenson for McCaffrey, great deal, great opportunity to buy McCaffrey where otherwise you just would not have had one. McCaffrey and CeeDee Lamb. We're looking right here and seeing that those guys were traded for Thielen, Ken Walker, and Rachaad White. This is an interesting one. Adam Thielen, to me, I don't really have him on teams. I keep saying it every week. Keep buying him, though, because he's going to keep being great. And the person that has him might think he's worse than CeeDee Lamb, and he's really not. So, interesting to see that this is kind of an even trade. I prefer the McCaffrey Lamb side for sure, but Kenneth Walker is a top 5 or 6 running back for me rest of season. Maybe more like 6 or 7 because I named the 4 that I thought were studs. Eckler's in there, Walker's in there. So top 6 for sure. But Adam Thielen is a great PPR option for fantasy. I know it doesn't seem like it, but he should be a top 15 wide receiver the rest of the way. It's certainly what he's been so far. Here we're going to take a look at Zach Moss's trade market right now. We talk about how he has been more involved PPR-wise, even with Jonathan Taylor coming back. So what kind of value does he have if you're looking to trade him away? Moss for Lockett. I like that in PPR. I think I'd rather have Lockett. It depends on team need, but that's a trade that can get done for sure. Moss for Joe Burrow. I think that's a trade that gets done depending on team needs. Moss for Addison. You're seeing a lot of Zach Moss traded for wide receivers, and that's just probably one team needs a running back, the other team needs a receiver, and they're guys that are in similar tiers right now, which tells you that Moss is in a tier, he exists. And that, might have some staying power. He might not. I'd rather have Addison than Moss for sure, taking away the position of it all. Moss for Cousins is going to be situational. Cousins, I think I'm a little bit down on him without Jefferson, But like these are players that you drafted that you're getting in exchange for Zach Moss right now. Definitely Moss over Elijah Mitchell. Whoever traded for Mitchell doesn't realize that Jordan Mason is ahead on the depth chart, even if McCaffrey is out. Moss for DJ Moore, we're looking at right here. DJ Moore and Moss for Aaron Jones. I prefer the Moss side, actually. I think DJ Moore over Aaron Jones. I know that Fields being injured might make people panic on DJ Moore, but Aaron Jones hasn't been great. So that's going to just depend on team need, though. Like the team that got Aaron Jones did upgrade it at running back, but they gave up a solid wide receiver 2 or 3 to do it. Zach Moss for Trevor Lawrence. A lot of Zach Moss for quarterback stuff, which honestly makes sense because the teams that are probably doing this may have drafted the way that I drafted, which is I don't draft a quarterback. Cousins was my quarterback, and he was like a 10th or 11th round pick. He was an afterthought. But let's say that you took that same strategy and didn't hit on a guy like Cousins who's had a pretty nice season. Let's say instead you had drafted Stafford or Derek Carr or somebody like that. And now you're saying, hey, Zach Moss, I'm not even starting him, and he's getting mega points every week. I could probably flip him to an RB needy team for their quarterback, and they can play waivers for quarterback. So you get Trevor Lawrence out of it. Like, I think that's a nice deal for the team getting Trevor Lawrence because they have established themselves with a quarterback that, at least at the beginning of the year, we thought was going to be elite. We'll see if Trevor does that. Moss for Sam Laporta is on the list here, and I think I like the Laporta side of that. Moss for Tank Dell. This is why Moss is so tradable because there are differing opinions on what he's going to bring to the table for you. But that gives you an idea of the trades you can make with Zach Moss. Let me know in the comments below what you are looking for your Zach Moss and whether I think you should make some of these deals that are being discussed. Derrick Henry being traded a ton. We'll take a look at him because he's on bye. That's part of the reason. We'll look at Mixon as well. Henry for Gibbs, man. I kind of could see that just because of the Montgomery injury. But remember, Gibbs has been hurt the last 2 weeks too, and it was an injury he got in practice. So just kind of a weird set of circumstances there. That's kind of dealer's choice. I think I'd prefer Henry because the Gibbs stuff I've cooled on. But I could see one game of usage for Gibbs turns it all around, and then you're wishing you would have gotten him a week ago. So I get that part of it. Henry and Amon-Ra for Pollard, Olave, Addison. This is a fair trade. I think Pollard above Henry, but Amon-Ra above these 2 wide receivers. But you're getting 2 top 24 wide receivers for Amon-Ra, and you're getting the better running back on the Pollard side of this. So that's here. Let me scroll it so you guys can see it a little better. That's a very interesting trade. Henry, Kelsey, Sutton for Tyreek and Evan Ingram. Wow. I think I prefer the Tyreek side, but Kelsey is the Tyreek of the tight end position. So that's just heavy hitters being dealt for one another. Like seeing stuff like that go down. Scrolling to some of the stuff that doesn't have draft picks involved. Henry and Andrews for Pollard. If this guy might have Sam Laporta, he might have a tight end that he likes. That guy that got Pollard, I think, did a nice job. But on the other side, I could see needing Henry and Andrews for depth and going, yeah, I got great value for my Tony Pollard. So I could see both sides of that. Henry for Mostert. Oh, man. Might like the Mostert side on that. But Mostert may not last long, right? He could get hurt. Jeff Wilson comes back. Devon Achane comes back. But he's in the great offense, and they do trust him. So I could see that being a mutually beneficial trade. Especially if you're like, I'm 2-4 and I need a win right now, so I got to start Mostert over Henry. I could see why you'd make that deal. Henry and Puka for Travis Etienne. I kind of like that for the Etienne side a little bit. I think Etienne's going to continue to be a stud. But the other side, if you had literally no wide receiver 2 or no flex to play and you needed Puka, I mean, take a shot on Puka. He's not going to have every week be great because Cooper Kupp is back. We'll do a wide receiver episode later today, I think, that we'll put up on YouTube. Click subscribe to the channel if you enjoy this stuff. But yeah, I think that's an interesting deal, and I think Etienne is the better running back than Henry. I would have Etienne in the top 8 or so, just like a touch behind Ken Walker. But Henry is more, top 10 to 12 to 14 at RB for me. Henry or CeeDee Lamb? I would take CeeDee Lamb. Just on a surface level. I don't know what the team needs are there, but I prefer to have the stud wide receiver over the stud running back for PPR and just for health purposes. Derrick Henry, Ramondre Stevenson. Yeah, Rashid Shaheed is basically a throw-in, so I would rather have Derrick Henry, I think, than Ramondre Stevenson, but Ramondre could be, better for PPR, so I could understand that side of that trade. So a lot of deals getting done. Henry for Justin Herbert. Down here at the bottom, we've got Henry and Christian Kirk for Saquon. That's interesting there, too. I think I might like the Saquon side of that, even though Christian Kirk has been very involved and reliable ever since the week 1 dud. He's been, like, very involved after that. We'll finish up with Joe Mixon, but let me know in the comments below if you've got questions on who should you got a player that you want to know more about or what my thoughts are on what that guy should be traded for this week. Drop him in the YouTube comment section below. We'll get to him in the comments for sure. But let's go ahead and wrap this up by talking a little Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon for Aaron Jones. Those guys are in very similar situations. Both going to have pretty good workloads, both in offenses that could be good, but we haven't necessarily seen either of them be super efficient. Aaron Jones has been hurt. That's kind of a dealer's choice. Usually when I'm making those kinds of trades, I want to get an advantage somewhere. So I might throw in a wide receiver on each side where I think I'm getting the better wide receiver and just see if the other guy, might bite on the trade. Mixon and Josh Reynolds for Brian Robinson. Yeah. I could Robinson is young to where he could have a elite second half because he's just got more juice behind him than a Joe Mixon. But I think the offense in Cincy better than Washington. So I'm not necessarily looking to downgrade and send to Josh Reynolds, who this guy may not have needed Josh Reynolds on his team, might have been a bench piece for him, but Josh Reynolds has been productive and, could continue to be for Detroit. So that's kind of an interesting one. Joe Mixon and Cooper Kupp for Devontae Adams and Bijan. Whoa. One of these names is not like the other. Cooper Kupp is a star. Adams is a star. Bijan is a star. Mixon, not quite. But I would say I'd rather have Kupp than Devontae. That's a pretty even trade. There's more value on the Devontae Bijan side, but Cooper Kupp's the best player in the deal. So that's an even trade that can get done. And again, I'm just giving you guys this information, not to say here's the trade you have to make or not make, but to give you an idea of what's out there and what's happening. It can hopefully jog your memory or inspire you to go, oh, I could offer this because so-and-so has Devontae Adams, and he was kind of talking, smack about Adams in the group chat when Jacoby Myers was getting all the touchdowns. Like, you can use this information to your advantage and know your league mates. That's a big part of making trades. Mixon and Miles Sanders for Najee and Breece Hall. I think Breece Hall is the biggest difference maker in the trade, but, Mixon is kind of in a similar spot where he's going to get workload. Najee and Miles Sanders both kind of stink. So sometimes that's a way to, if you're getting the guy that you really want, you can make it look like the deal is better for your opponent because maybe he thinks Najee is better than Miles Sanders, but you don't really care about that part of the trade. You're really just after, Mixon or Breece Hall, like that sort of thing. Mixon for Jacoby Myers. For an RB needy team, I like the Mixon side because he's going to slot into RB2 and be safe for you. And Myers could end up putting up a ton of PPR points, but on that roster, he may not have been as necessary to the guy that was trading him away. Mixon for Henry with a Jamal Williams throw-in. I prefer Henry on that one. More upside, I think. Mixon and Puka for CeeDee Lamb and Josh Downs. I'd take Lamb over Puka. And if I didn't need Joe Mixon at running back, I'm happy to do that 2 for 1. But I also get a flyer on Josh Downs. So I think I like the wide receiver side on that. But every time I say that, keep in mind, I don't know what you need at running back. So make sure that's why we want you to comment and let me know. So if you say, hey, dude, I can't make that trade, I need a running back, that would be very helpful information and kind of helping you along in the comments. And then we got Mixon and Madison for Breece Hall. Definitely prefer the Breece Hall side, especially if the person getting Hall can afford to do that 2 for 1 because they've got depth at RB. And then Mixon Pickens for Diggs. I love the Diggs side on that trade. That's how you 2 for 1. Joe Mixon and George Pickens for Stephon Diggs. Excellent trade for the Diggs side. That's going to do it for this edition of the show. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening. We're going to have a wide receiver trade targets episode up later on this week, hopefully by Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday evening, but it may be Thursday. We'll have to wait and see. Thank you guys so much. Subscribe to the channel if you enjoy the content, and we'll talk to you next time on the Brenden Schaeffer Fantasy Football Channel. Peace.